So just getting stuck into the process, obviously, for us, me being a full-time guide, it was something that I never really had to deal with, was having the safari blues when you leave a safari, and having that feeling of obviously wanting to return immediately, or go into a bit of depression, you could say, about being away from the bush, because the bush obviously definitely does touch us all in its own way, and is very, very special. Like I mentioned, being a full-time guide, I never really got to feel that up until when I left the guiding world and became a photographic guide with Wildeye. And that's what's made lockdown in particular, I think lockdown for us here in South Africa, it has been very, very difficult. Obviously staying home, I mean, I've probably been out of my house maybe 4 or 5 times, and that's just to the shops. But it's also given me time to relook and relive some of the safaris that I've hosted over the last couple of years. And the reason why I wanted to talk about these 2 different topics was also just, you know, it obviously helps get through the lockdown, not necessarily for myself, but for others that may be feeling the same, just in terms of going through the different routines. The last time I traveled was actually on the 9th of December last year. So for myself, it has been a little bit more difficult. And that's why I wanted to do some of these webinars based on how I got into guiding and photography, and what I do before I travel, what I do after I travel, just more as a reminder. And in a way, sometimes I hope that there's some tips and things that you ideally can take from it, but it also serves to me as a good reminder of what I do, and what is out there after lockdown, because obviously it hasn't been easy for all of us. And for me, I'm not a big city person at all. So it hasn't been the easiest of times, and I mean that from a getting out point of view. I grew up in a little town called White River, very, very small. So I spent a lot of time outdoors, cycling, riding to dams, going fishing, going to the Kruger National Park, going to private game reserves. So I was always out and about and in amongst nature. So even just the move after guiding back to Johannesburg was a big change. Excuse me, sorry, because it was something that I'd never done. So these kind of webinars also help me as much as I hope that they help you. For us, in terms of traveling, starting with the airport process. So I am quite, like I mentioned in the last webinar, I'm a perfectionist, but I am also quite a messy person. So normally when I leave a safari, I get very excited to go home. Obviously, I'm quite sad that the safari has come to an end, but I do get really excited to go home, to see family, to see my daughter. She's just over 10 months now, so obviously I haven't traveled too much with her around so far, and there's lockdown, but I do get really excited to come home. So a lot of my perfectionism goes out the window, and I shove everything together, but one thing that remains is my camera bag and my superstition of travel. So I mentioned last time, I'm very superstitious. I have been my entire life, ever since I was a kid playing sport. I always had to put on my kit on the left-hand side first, and then the rest of my kit would follow. So for example, cricket, if any of you, hello, Lego from Spain. If any of you do know cricket or anything like that that requires padding, I always used to kit up the left-hand side of my body before I did the rest, and that's been a superstition my entire life. When it came to my camera bag and my camera gear, started from when I first bought my first camera ever. There's very specific ways in which I like to pack it. I mentioned last time that I often repack it as I'm traveling, and yes, it is a massive pain, but I still find myself having to do it. And it's the same on my way back home. I still have to organize my camera bag before I leave the safari destination. It's a very good and bad, I don't know how to explain it, very good and bad time, you know, that from the moment that we leave guests. So from the moment that we leave guests, it allows us a lot of time to reflect on our safari that we had with guests. A lot of our scheduled trips now, talking past the Mara camp and what we do there in that product, a lot of our scheduled trips, sometimes it's the first time that we've run them. So there's a lot of different things that we need to take up and think about going forward that we can take back to the office. So from the moment we leave guests, I try and switch off for a little while. You know, sometimes a week, 2 week, sometimes 3 weeks, 4 months, 4 weeks of travel away from family, and that can be quite draining mentally. So what I personally like to try and do is, yes, still have contact with family when I'm on safari, but when I'm on safari, I'm on safari. That is my main focus. If I get time to speak to my family, I definitely do that. But when I'm away from safari, I'm away from safari, and I'm at home, I'm at home. So that's the mindset that I have, and the balance that I try and keep up with. Just because on average, us guides spend about 120 days outside of the country. So that's a lot of time away from home. So you've got to find the balance between the two. And what I generally try and do, and what works for me, is switching off once I say goodbye to guests. But there's only a certain amount of that I can do. Sometimes we travel back with guests, which is also nice. I mean, you can talk about the past safari that you've had with them, but if I'm on my own, it's a time just to switch off. I love music, like I mentioned last week in the webinar. It allows me to obviously switch off, disconnect from everything around me, disconnect mentally from being switched on in terms of a expedition leader and photographic guide, and just kind of be me and try and find a bit of peace and relax before I get home, especially now before I get home, because now when I get home, it's absolute chaos with a young one around, as I'm sure some of you know already. So yeah, I switch off, but when it comes to the airport camera bag, I'm very much the same. So pack my camera bag exactly as it was when I arrived. When I get to the airport, I try and obviously try and have it that I'm there well before time. A lot of our Kenya, Tanzania trips gives us, in terms of connecting time, it gives us a good 4 or 5 hours, which suits me perfectly fine. I know some of the other guides complain because it's a long wait, but I personally would rather have more time in the airport than rushing around last minute trying to find where I need to go, what I need to do, and all of that kind of stuff. So same old. I like to get my tickets, get my bags through, then obviously go through passport control, security, and once the other side, then I start to relax again. Like I mentioned last time, I am quite an anxious person. So when it comes to the special having things specifically done, I get very anxious about it. My messy side, there's no anxiety there. But once I get through, then I go and grab something to eat, and just give myself time to still just to kind of relax away from the safari mindset. But from a guide's point of view, there's a lot obviously that we need to feed back to the office. So normally how it works for us guides is, depending on the number of days that we've been away, we'll determine the number of days that we get off after the safari. So for example, if I'm away for just over a week, I get a day off at home to spend, relax, and just to kind of re-energize before heading back into the office. If it's an extended safari, it might be 2 days. So what I try and do then in the airport, after I've eaten and kind of had a beer and relaxed a little bit, is then there's a lot of communication, obviously, in a company like this, to keep it ticking and to keep it going and to keep it successful. Communication, it's like any relationship, communication has to be key. And especially with the ladies like Tanya and Judy, who run the scheduled departures and the private departures, it's crucial that if we're on a private or scheduled safari, that we constantly keep them in the loop as to what's happening. And a lot of things I think they do go unnoticed. I know that they often check in all the guests, including myself, for our flights back home, which is something very, very small, but it makes a massive difference on my life. I'm sure it does for guests as well. I know they've also handled a lot of issues that we've had on safari, like lost bags and things like that. So they make our lives a lot easier. But in doing so, we obviously as guides want to make their lives a bit easier. So the sooner we can give them any feedback, with whether it be lodge based, so if we've used new safari destinations, if it's a lodge, the way the lodge works, how the laundry system worked, how the guides were on site, how terrible the guests were. No, that one's a joke. But just give them general feedback, especially if it is a new safari that we're hosting. So what we normally do in that day afterwards is then send an email out to the office with an update about the trip, my thoughts on the trip, is if there's anything that I can identify that would work better going forward. So if it's a combination trip of 4 nights, 3 nights here, is it better to switch it around and do 3 nights here, 4 nights here? Is it better to scratch this destination and rather use this destination in the future? So I normally like to, like I said, when I'm home, I'm home. So I normally like to, sorry, excuse my hat today, but as you can see, lockdown, sorry, I'm changing the subject. Lockdown, our hairdressers are not open yet, so I am looking a bit like a caveman, so apologies for the hat, it's not being rude. So yeah, from our side and my side, when I'm home, and that's why while I'm waiting for my flight. So as I mentioned last time, I like to get to the gates at least an hour ahead of time, just to know that I am actually at the right gate. I'll then start to do this email where I can just give some of my feedback back to the office. They receive it quickly, which is great. And then I've got peace of mind the next day when I get home that I can enjoy my downtime and be at home and relax with nothing else on my mind to do. So there's just a couple of other things that I wrote down here that I wanted to share with you. Things, it's not necessarily to scare you. So when traveling, it's just a few things that I've noticed. It's a few things that you've had issues with in the past, not necessarily even as a company, but even family holidays and things, is to always obviously make sure that you've got all your belongings before you leave your destination. So I've actually got, I don't want to say a moon bag. It's not a moon bag. It's a travel bag that I keep all my documentation in, because also with us traveling with a whole bunch of gear, we have to clear it with customs, and we need a whole bunch of paperwork for it as well. So not only for my own gear, I need it for my own gear, my laptops. A lot of guests do gear rentals through us, so I've got to have all the paperwork for that. I need my passport, my yellow fever paper. So all of those documents I've got to keep safe in a safe place. And the perfectionist side of me has it all in order in one specific spot. But just a few things to remind all of you, obviously when leaving a destination. It sounds stupid, but you'll be surprised in this industry how many people make that mistake, and then it's last minute rushing here and there to try and make arrangements before international flights head off, and it's all chaos. Another thing to remember is international cell phones, so cell phone packages. I know that data, especially when you're traveling away, we're fortunate in that we get local SIM cards when we travel, but not everybody can do that. So I know that data, I know my mother traveled up into Africa. Was it my mother? Or mother-in-law traveled, and obviously when you use your data, sometimes you don't always take note of how much is being used. And at the end of the day, you can run up a bill of a couple of £1,000 or a couple of thousand US dollars very, very quickly if you're not careful. So these are simple things that obviously should go through your mind. I'm sure do go through your mind, but stuff to be aware of and stuff that we see all the time when we're out in the field. Take care of yourself. So I know that there's a lot of talk about, okay, well, obviously COVID-19 now, but especially the African countries that we travel to, there's a lot of talk about malaria and taking precautions for malaria. And especially, I know coming from the States, if you go to a doctor and you say that you're going to Africa and it's a malaria area, they have to prescribe you something. And it's normally something like Malarone, or there's a couple of others that I forget the name. But what you got to remember with some of these is those doctors obviously by law have to tell you that. And it's the same in South Africa. They recommend, so if I go to the doctor and I say I'm going to Kenya for 2 weeks, they recommend for me to take medication. I don't, though, because we travel so frequently into these areas that I can't be on that kind of medication for so often throughout the year. It's just, it's not good for my health. So then it's more looking at the symptoms afterwards. So even having taken precautions for wherever you may travel, it's always good to know what the medication can do to you. So in terms of side effects, so that's during travel. A lot of the medication you still have to take afterwards once you return home. So even then you can pick up side effects, but it's also good just to know from my side that things like Malarone and that sometimes mask the symptoms of malaria. And now this isn't, I'm not telling you this to scare you. It's just the reality of it. Sometimes we've had cases where, you know, it hides the symptoms for longer than it is, and it becomes a little bit more serious than what it actually is. For me, malaria doesn't scare me at all. So malaria basically, and I'm sure you all know this, but malaria basically symptoms are very similar to a cold or a flu. And it normally kicks in about 10 to 14 days after you've been in a malaria or a high risk area. So for us coming back from a trip, if we feel 10 days to a week to 2 weeks after we've traveled, if we're feeling like we're getting a bit of a cold or general cold symptoms, we go straight to the doctor. It's a pinprick in the finger. 5 minutes later, you know if you've got it or not. You go straight onto antibiotics and you're back on your feet in the next day or so. The problem with malaria and why it has such a bad name is obviously in Africa, it's a very, very poor continent. And in a lot of the rural areas, they don't have the necessary means or facilities to be able to get the necessary treatment. So obviously a number of people get malaria every year and they pass away from it. And that's just due to not having the knowledge, but also not having the funds and not having the medical facilities to seek attention to get help for curing malaria. So just something to keep in mind if you are taking any form of medication while you're traveling, just to keep in mind the side effects that they may have while you're taking them. And if it is a form of medication that you've got to take when you get home, it's also something just to keep in mind that you may pick up some symptoms along the way in terms of side effects or possible symptoms of what you're trying to prevent. In this case, we're talking about malaria. The last thing I had down here was the best way, obviously, to help yourself through this. And we all experience it. And even for myself, we travel, we go to these amazing destinations, we have these incredible experiences and create these incredible memories. And we get home and there's a sense of longing to be back there. So it sounds silly, but the best way to cure that is to simply book another trip. If you obviously everything costs money, but yeah, that's the best way to do it. So from when I get home, I've got that day off, which I try and take to recuperate. Also, once again, try and keep my mind as far away from the trip as possible. Just in terms of mentally, you need to try and find with what we do. It's an amazing job, and we're very fortunate to do what we do, but obviously mentally you're always switched on and you've always got to be thinking of something or other as you go along. So it's very important for us to be able to take that time to ourselves and to be able to switch off before we get back into the office, get back into the swing of things. Excuse me, sorry. So what we normally do is that's how I take that day, spend time with family, spend time with my daughter, and just pretty much press the reset button, because once we get it back into the office, it's all systems go. A lot of the time, a lot of the places that we visit do have Wi-Fi, so we do have access to our mails. It's not always easy to obviously do mails and that on Safari, because we believe that when we're on Safari for you. That's the end of the story. It's as easy as that. It's not about, nothing else really matters to me. If I've got an important email, I'll forward it on to someone in the office who will then take it from there and handle it, because I believe that when I'm on Safari with you, you are my concern. You are what I should be thinking about. And sometimes the emails aren't important and can wait till I get back. So that day in between is very crucial for me, because once I get back into the office, it's hit the ground running. You're straight back into the swing of things. Obviously, some of the other guys may be in the office, but all the administrative staff are there doing what they're doing, and it's a very, very busy environment to be in. So it's great to be back, and it's nice to see everybody, but you hit with this wall of emails from 2 weeks that are built up that you've got to now start processing. You've got some images and video content that you've created while you've been out on the trip. And like I said, it's not about our photographs. We're obviously there for you, but we also do need content, obviously, in terms of marketing and all of that going forward. So when I get home, I don't know how many of you use Lightroom, but I obviously do. It's a great way of keeping everything centralized, keeping all my images in one place, and also being able to file and organize them all in one place, in one catalog. So how I do it is, when we get back, what's expected of us is normally a bit of video content to try and put together something for marketing or something about the trip that we can either send to guests that have traveled with us, which is always a nice thing for the memories, to relive those memories, and then also a trip report. So the trip reports are quite crucial. I love doing them. I know different people in the office have their different opinions, calling it a trip report, but I enjoy going through trip reports because it allows me to go through all the photos from the trip, and this is where I get back into the mindset of that specific safari. So with Lightroom, if you are familiar with it, there's obviously a different way to filter photos and to mark them. You can color coordinate them, you can star them, you can reject them. So generally my first batch that goes in, our trip report's got to go out generally the first week that we're back. So I have a starring system where 3 stars is an image that I will use in the blog, 4 stars is an image that I want to come back and look at a later stage, and 5 stars is my favorite images from that specific trip. It doesn't mean I won't use them in the blog, but that's just a quick and easy way for me to work through my images and get images ready that I can then get out in a trip report. And something that I've been, excuse me, sorry, something that I've been doing quite a bit of lately on trips is, obviously with all of our trips, when we finish up with guests, is to contact them. It's always nice just to send an email to you guys, catch up, and if you have any questions or anything after safari, then we can obviously address them. But something that I have really tried to do, or doing a lot more of, and am going to do a lot more of going forward, is after each trip doing more FaceTime like this, because you find that especially it doesn't even have to be about the photography side of things. I think when you go out on safari, there's so many different elements and things that are going on. It takes you a while to process. And I know, like for me, I don't touch an image when I'll use the photograph for an example here, but I don't touch an image until I get back home, because it allows me to remove myself from that space. And even though I've been doing this for just over 13 years, I still have that same feeling as I did from year one in terms of passion and feeling when I'm out in nature. So I prefer to kind of relax. I know when I'm out on safari, I do tend to get quite excited. So I keep my images in that for when I get home, in a bit of a calmer environment to work through them. And what I do with guests now is ask them to send me, for example, their top 10 favorite photographs from the trip, and then give them a bit of feedback on those images. So like this, sitting on Zoom, you're able to then also do screen sharing, so you can help them with editing their different images. And you know, it's not necessarily that they've done it bad, or they've edited it badly, but we, as photographers, we all see things differently. So it just adds something extra onto that trip, and gives guests a little bit more into it, because longer trips, like when we're in the Mara, when we doing best of Serengeti, we don't always have time to sit and look through photographs and take our time on them. So I try and get in touch with guests, firstly by email, also then by FaceTime, just to, even if it's just to have a general chat over a cup of coffee and have a catch up and see what it's like, see how they're feeling after the trip, what they enjoyed about it, what they didn't enjoy about it, get a bit of feedback, and just try and keep that connection, because that's the whole reason why I started in this career. Well, firstly, as a full-time guide, there was 2 things. There was passion for wildlife, and there was meeting new people. And that's what I absolutely love. It's going out into a place that I love, that I'm passionate about, meeting new people, creating new friends. And for me, it's not about once you get on your airplane and I get on mine, I forget about you completely. No, I go through all this stuff that I've mentioned, but I don't want it to just end there. That's where I think our company, and I worked for another photographic company, which I'm not going to mention, but that's where I think our company is a bit different to others in that it is very people orientated. So I really enjoy the people side of it, the connections that you make with people, and being able to call up a guest 8 months down the line after safari and be able to have a cup of coffee with them and a catch up and, you know, say, I've just been here. I saw on social media that you just traveled there. How was it? So it sounds simple, but that's very, very important to me. And yeah, so from my side, that's pretty much it. Is there any questions from any of you that you would like to ask me about travel, about before traveling, during traveling, after traveling, anything random that you would like to ask me? I hope that there was something useful in there. I know that I often talk and go off in different directions. I apologize for that. I do have a little bit of an ADD history. But if there is anything from you guys that you would like to know about safaris or about booking safaris, if you've had a look through our website, it's actually going through a current change. It's going to have a bit of a facelift and look a bit different. So you obviously can see all of our safari offerings there, but I am open to helping any of you. So I know obviously it's been a tough time with travels, but you can get hold of me via email. So my email address is trevor@wild-i.co.za. So not necessarily if you have anything now that you want to ask, but if you do have any travel related questions, or if you do, like I mentioned, just want to have a catch up, do a FaceTime or Skype and have one-on-one chat with me, I would be more than happy to do so. We could share a cup of coffee and discuss things further. But if you don't have any questions for me now, then I am going to love and leave you. I hope that you got something out of that. As always, I enjoy talking to you. There's a number of new different webinar topics that are going to be released in the next day or two. And I hope that there are a few that are going to appeal to you. If you've got anything that you would like me to cover, that's what I was going to say. Also, I've given you my email address. I'll tell you it again. It's trevor@wild-i.co.za. If there's any topic in particular that you would like me to cover during one of these webinars or get my opinion on it, please email me your suggestions. I would love to help you out in any way I can. Obviously, these topics are thought up by ourselves, but I mean, we have had a few recommendations from guests. So if there is anything from your side that you want to know more about our company, about the safari offerings that we do, about anything that the company does, how we edit photos, anything like that, please get in touch. Let me know. We obviously are going to be doing webinars, not only during lockdown, but they are becoming a thing of the future. And I'd love to help you as much as I can. So thank you very much for joining. And if you do have any questions, please don't hesitate. Get in touch. Let me know. If you are feeling a bit lonely and you want to have a cup of coffee, I'm often feeling lonely and I really enjoy coffee, so let me know. But for now, thank you very much for tuning in, and I'll catch up with you all soon.